Let me tell you about the moment a man begins to fall. It is not a dramatic crash. It is not the grand boast or the public challenge to the heavens. No, it is quieter than that. It is a silence that grows inside him. It is the slow, almost imperceptible closing of a door. Think of a child looking at the night sky for the first time. There's a catch in the breath, a widening of the eyes. He feels the sheer scale of it, the chill of the infinite, the humbling mystery of being a small, living thing under all that darkness and light. That feeling, that is reverence. It is the understanding that you are part of something vast, a single thread in a tapestry you did not weave. Pride, the kind that corrupts the soul, begins when that feeling dies. It is not replaced by shouting. It is replaced by a different kind of quiet, a strategic, calculating quiet. The awe for the universe turns into an appraisal of it. The stars are no longer wonders. They become points of navigation or sources of energy. The people are no longer fellow threads in the tapestry. They become assets, liabilities, pieces on a board. The man stops asking, "What does this mean?" and starts asking, "What can this do for me?" This is the fundamental mistake. The great substitution. He has traded reverence for self-reference. He is no longer looking out with wonder. He is looking in with a ledger. Every experience, every relationship, every stroke of luck or disaster is filtered through a single, relentless question. How does this reflect on me? How does this advance my purpose? How can I use this? In that shift, he removes himself from the story. He is no longer a character subject to the plot, to tragedy, to grace, to the twists he cannot see coming. He appoints himself the author, and as the author, he believes he controls the narrative. He believes his will is the pen that writes the world. His past successes are no longer fortunate alignments of skill and chance. They become sacred scripture, proof texts that justify every future action. I did this before, therefore I am entitled to do it again. I succeeded here, therefore my judgment is law. He builds a prison of his own making and calls it a throne room. The walls are lined with mirrors, not windows. He listens only for the echo of his own voice, mistaking it for the voice of destiny. He stops seeking counsel from a place of humility and instead seeks validation for decisions already made. He may pray, but it is not prayer. It is a soliloquy. He may speak of fate, but it is a fate he has written for himself. The universe, with all its mystery, its pain, its beauty, its terrifying randomness, is reduced to a backdrop for his own performance. I have stood on gargoyles overlooking this city and seen this sin written in light and shadow. I have seen it in the eyes of a billionaire who believes his money is a force of nature, rewriting the rules of men. I have seen it in the heart of a detective, so convinced of his own rightness that he becomes blind to the truth. I have felt its cold whisper in my own mind, the belief that the mission, my pain, my rules, are the only things that matter, that the greater good is whatever I decide it to be. That is the poison. When you sever the cord of reverence, reverence for life, for law, for something greater than your own pain and your own power, you are left floating in a vacuum of your own creation. There is no North Star because you have declared yourself the only navigational point. There is no higher court of appeal because you are the judge. There is no sin, only error, no crime, only strategic failure. And so a man becomes his own God, a petty, lonely, fragile God, a God who must constantly prove his divinity, not to worshippers, but to a universe that stubbornly refuses to acknowledge it. The fall from that height is not a tragedy. It is a law of physics, a law that pride in its deafness forgets, but the echo of that first reverence, it never fully goes away. It is the memory of the stars, and it is in that memory that a path back, however difficult, can always be found. We understand the error. We see the slow pivot from wonder to will, but a vacuum of belief is a terrifying thing for the human heart. It does not stay empty. So the man, having dethroned the heavens, does not simply stand in the empty temple. He builds a new altar, and he places upon it the only thing he has left, the only thing he now trusts himself. But it is not a simple idol. He is a complex creature, and so his self-worship becomes a pantheon, a dark trinity. The first deity he constructs is the god of his past successes. This is not a god of memory, but of dogma. Every victory, every narrow escape, every time his will bent the world to his purpose. These are not merely events, they are miracles. They are the sacred texts. He returns to them, not with gratitude for fortune or help, but with a theologian's fervor, using them to justify every future action. He chants the scripture of his own history. I was right then, therefore I am right now. I survived that, therefore I am invincible. My method worked once, and so it is holy. This God grants him the arrogance of infallibility. It turns experience into blind dogma, and learning into heresy. It tells him the rules of decency, of caution, of mercy, do not apply to him, for he has already written his own. The second is the God of his unfettered will. If the first God sanctifies his past, this one consecrates his present impulse. This is the God of the clenched fist, the set jaw, the voice that says, because I can. This deity's only commandment is that there shall be no other commandments above his own desire. Logic, empathy, consequence, these are the weak gods of lesser men. For him, the act of wanting something becomes the divine right to possess it. The act of deciding something makes it so. His will is not just a force, it is a creative act. He speaks, and in his own mind it is reality. He reasons in a terrifyingly simple circle. I willed it, therefore it is right. It is right because I willed it. This is the ultimate corruption of conscience. Morality becomes aesthetics. Right and wrong are merely questions of what serves the strength of his own decree. And to sustain these two, to live with the cognitive dissonance they create, he must erect a third, most insidious idol, the god of his own narrative. This is the spinner of tales, the weaver of lies, the editor of reality. This god's full-time work is to maintain the fiction of the other two. When the world pushes back, when a plan fails, when an ally betrays him, when his will meets an immovable object, this God does not allow for the humbling truth of failure. It immediately crafts the story. The failure was sabotage. The betrayal was inevitable jealousy. The immovable object was a test of faith. This God filters all evidence, rewrites all history, and silences all dissenting voices, both outside and, most crucially, inside his own mind. It turns him into both the protagonist and the sole narrator of a story where he is always inevitably justified. I have interrogated men under this trinity. You see it in their eyes. They are not lying to you, they are preaching to you from their own gospel. The tyrant who sees a city not as people, but as a testament to his own vision. The broken hero who sees his vengeance not as a crime, but as a sacred duty only he can perform. They are trapped in a closed system of their own divinity. They worship the God of their past to justify their ruthlessness. They invoke the God of their will to execute it. And they deploy the God of their narrative to absolve themselves of the carnage that follows. It is a lonely faith, a terrible, silent liturgy. There are no hymns of joy, only the drone of self-justification, no communion, only the consumption of others as fuel for the ego, no peace, only the exhausting, perpetual work of maintaining the lie of one's own godhood against the constant, pressing reality of a world that refuses to kneel. And in that refusal is their only hope. So now the temple is built. The idols are in place. The man stands at his own altar. And here we must understand the logic of this place. It is not the logic of the world outside. It is not the logic of cause and effect, of right and wrong as others know it. It is a closed system, a dream logic. And at its heart is a single, unshakable axiom, a divine decree from which all other truths flow. I am, therefore it is right. This is the terrifying simplicity of the self-made God. He does not wrestle with ethics. He does not pace the floor, torn between two difficult choices. That is the agony of a mortal man. a man who believes in a standard outside himself. For our would-be deity, the standard is his own existence, his own desire, his own will. The moment a thought forms in his mind, it is no longer just a thought, a revelation. The moment a want stirs in his heart, it is no longer just a want, it is a holy command. The moral calculus that governs the rest of us, weighing hurt against good, principle against outcome, is for him a primitive arithmetic, long since transcended. His decisions are not made, they are revealed. To question them is not dissent, it is blasphemy. To oppose them is not a conflict of interests, it is a crusade against the divine order. You see it in his eyes when he explains himself. There is no apology, no hedging. There is only the calm, chilling certainty of a prophet stating a natural law. This had to be done, not because of some external code, but because he decided to do it. The decision itself becomes the justification. The act of his will imbues the action with a sacred necessity. This corrupts everything it touches. It turns allies into apostles, whose only virtue is their loyalty to his vision. It turns enemies into heretics, to be silenced, not just defeated, but purged from the narrative. It turns bystanders into either congregation or collateral damage, and most tragically, it turns his own conscience, that inner voice meant to echo a higher law, into nothing more than a public relations manager for his ego. Its job is no longer to convict him of wrong, but to reframe every action as a necessary, even noble step in his grand design. Mercy becomes strategic leniency. Ruthlessness becomes courageous clarity. Betrayal becomes a painful but divinely sanctioned pruning. I have seen this logic play out in the dark heart of this city. The drug lord who believes his empire is a righteous economic system because he built it. The corrupt official who sees his theft not as a crime but as the well-earned tribute of a smarter man ruling lesser ones. The vigilante who crosses a line, who breaks a bone that didn't need breaking, who instills a fear that has no purpose but his own rage, and tells himself they deserved it. I saw the truth, my truth. In that moment he is not delivering justice. He is performing a ritual for the God of his will. He is proving his own divinity to himself by demonstrating his power to redefine what is acceptable. It is a sickness of reasoning, a mental prison where the bars are made of mirrors. Every reflection confirms his rightness. Every echo agrees with him. He lives in a world where his feelings are facts, his hunches are prophecies, and his anger is the wrath of a just God. He becomes incapable of true remorse, because remorse requires acknowledging a law higher than your own feelings. He can only feel regret. Regret that his divine plan met resistance. Regret that his perfect will was misunderstood. This is why you cannot reason with a man in this state. You cannot appeal to a shared morality, because he does not share yours. You cannot point to the wreckage he leaves behind, because his God of narrative has already written that wreckage as a necessary sacrifice, a tragic but justified cost on the path to his glorious purpose. He speaks a different theological language, where the only sin is doubt, and the only virtue is the strength of his own conviction. His reign, therefore, is built on a fault line of perfect certainty. And the world, in its beautiful, terrible, messy reality, is built on everything that certainty excludes, on chance, on other wills, on independent love and hate, on laws of physics and consequence, that do not care about his internal revelations. He has declared himself a God in a universe that did not consent, and his entire existence becomes a war against the humbling, undeniable reality that he is not, and in the end, reality always wins. So he stands there, a king in a castle of his own conviction, a God on a throne of his own making. The logic is ECT, airtight, a closed loop of self-justification. But there is a cost to building a universe with yourself at the center, a terrible quiet tax on the soul. He is isolated, utterly, profoundly alone. He sits on a lonely throne. Consider what a throne means. It is raised, it is set apart. One does not share a throne, one does not lean on a throne for support. One sits upon it above all others. This is the inevitable architecture of his pride. Having declared himself the author, the judge, the God of his world, he has rendered every other relationship into a function of his divinity. People cease to be people. They become, in his eyes, instruments of his will, obstacles to his plan, or an audience for his performance. He cannot have peers, only subjects or rivals. He cannot have partners, only disciples or opponents. How could he? To acknowledge an equal would be to acknowledge another center of the universe, another source of divine will. That would be polytheism, a heresy in his new religion. So the friend who offers honest counsel is no longer a friend. He is a doubter, a challenge to the divine decree. The loved one who begs him to see the pain he is causing is no longer a partner in life. She is a distraction, a test of his devotion to his own cause. He listens to them not to understand, but to manage, to assess their loyalty to his narrative. Trust becomes impossible. True trust requires vulnerability. It requires saying, "I do not know," and believing the other person will not use that against you. A God is never vulnerable. A God never says, "I do not know." A God only reveals. So he trusts no one fully, because to place your fate in another's hands is to admit you are not in control. He is surrounded by yes men and agents, by people who fear him or feed off him, but not by anyone who knows him. How could they? He has made his true self, the doubting, erring, needing self, the ultimate heresy. It must be hidden, even from him. This is the loneliness I have seen in the eyes of the powerful, not the loneliness of an empty room, but the loneliness of a crowded one, where every smile is a calculation, and every handshake is an assessment. It is the silence that descends when you realize your orders will be followed, your whims catered to, but your pain is your own country, and you have declared it a forbidden zone, unfit for a deity to inhabit. You have no one to tell that you are afraid, because a God is not afraid. He becomes a curator of his own image, not a participant in his own life. Every conversation is a performance of his strength. Every relationship is a strategic alliance. Love becomes possession. Respect becomes fear. Fellowship becomes a board meeting. The simple human joy of being with another person. The unspoken understanding. The shared silence that isn't empty. The laughter that serves no purpose but the moment. These things wither and die. They are flowers that cannot grow in the thin, cold air of that mountaintop throne. And this isolation is not just emotional, it is tactical. It is his greatest weakness, because when you see the world only through the lens of your own will, you become blind. You miss the whispers of discontent that become rebellions. You miss the loyal ally feeling used, who will one day walk away. You misinterpret the motives of others, projecting your own self-interest onto them. You live in a hall of mirrors, and while every reflection tells you you are glorious, none of them can warn you of the fire spreading at your back. I know this loneliness. I have felt its chill. The mask I wear, it is not just to protect an identity, it is a barrier. It raises the throne, whether I wish it to or not. It turns the yearning for connection into a strategic liability. It whispers that to need is to be weak, and to be weak is to fail the mission. That is the poison of it. The proud man playing God does this to himself willingly. He builds the walls, brick by brick, calling each one a principle, a necessity, a piece of his divine right. And then one day, he finds the walls have grown so high, he can no longer see the sky, only the reflection of his own face on the inside of the stone. He is the most powerful being in his own world, and the most impoverished. He has everything he has claimed, and nothing that matters. He has a kingdom of echoes, and a heart that has forgotten how to beat for anything but its own glory. And a heart that beats only for itself is a heart already beginning to die. And so he sits, enthroned in his solitude, the architect of his own reality. The world, filtered through his perfect logic, makes perfect sense. Every echo agrees, every reflection nods. But the universe is not obligated to respect the fictions of men, no matter how fervently they are believed. It has its own grammar. It operates on laws of physics and consequence, of cause and effect, of the stubborn, independent will of others. It does not bow. And so, inevitably, the fall comes, not as a punishment from an angry sky, but as a simple, relentless law of nature. You cannot sustain a lie against the weight of what is real. Call it the cosmic backlash. It begins not with a bang, but with a tremor. A small, inconvenient crack in the narrative. A plan divinely decreed fails for no grand reason. Just a random variable he couldn't account for. A trusted instrument, a person he saw as a mere extension of his will, makes a choice of their own. Not out of malice, but out of their own humanity. A law he believed he had transcended, a law of economics, of physics, of the human heart, asserts itself with indifferent force. His god of pastess, success is silent, because this script wasn't in the sacred texts. His god of unfettered will meets a wall that does not crumble at his command. At first, he does not fall. He recalibrates. This is the work of his god of narrative. The failure is reframed. It was a test. It was sabotaged by lesser minds. It was a necessary lesson to harden his resolve. The narrative walls grow thicker, but the universe is patient, and it is infinite. It sends another tremor, and another. The cracks begin to multiply. They run through the foundations of his empire, his relationships, his sense of self. The loneliness of the throne becomes a palpable chill. The yes men start to glance at each other when his back is turned. The fear he cultivated begins to curdle into resentment. The world outside his story, the messy, weeping, laughing, unpredictable world, keeps happening. It refuses to conform. Then comes the quake, the event that cannot be explained away. Often, it is something he could not will. The betrayal of the one person he, in a hidden chamber of his heart, still believed was truly loyal. Not for gain, but for principle, their principle. The illness that strikes his own body, indifferent to his iron will. The child who looks at him not with awe, but with fear. A loss so total, so absolute, that all his narrative machinery seizes up and smokes. In that moment the mirrors shatter. He is left standing in the rubble of his own creation, surrounded by the sharp, glittering fragments of his self-image. And in those fragments he does not see a god. He sees a man, a tired, frightened, fallible man. He sees the wreckage of relationships he called collateral damage. He hears the echoes of warnings he called blasphemy. He feels the cold wind of the real world on a face that had been sheltered behind layers of fiction. The throne is gone. The temple is dust. The three idols lie broken at his feet, the god of past successes, silent in the face of present ruin, the god of unfettered will, broken against a world that would not bend, the god of his own narrative, its voice finally drowned out by the deafening silence of the truth. This is the humbling. It is not gentle, it is catastrophic. It feels like annihilation, because it is. It is the annihilation of a fiction he has lived within, breathed within for so long that its collapse feels like the end of the world. And in a way, it is. His world ends. I have witnessed this fall from the shadows. I have seen the tyrant in the courthouse, the hollowed-out shell of a man finally hearing a verdict he did not write. I have seen the brilliant mind, convinced of its own righteousness, broken by the simple, unanswerable love of the family it sacrificed. I have stood over men at their lowest point, not in triumph, but in recognition. The outcome is always the same. The universe does not compromise. It presents the bill for the fantasy, and the currency it demands is the fantasy itself. It is a terrible mercy. The ground at the bottom is hard. It is real. It is the same ground everyone else walks on. For the first time in years, perhaps in his entire adult life, he is standing on something true. The fall from the lonely throne is not into an abyss. It is onto the common earth. And it is only here, in the dust and the honesty of his own brokenness, that his eyes can finally clear, that he can look up, not at the reflection of his own glory, but at the vast starlit sky he had forgotten existed, the same sky he once, long ago, looked upon with wonder. The fall is not the end of the man. It is the end of the god he pretended to be. And that ending is the only possible beginning. So he has fallen. The throne is dust. The idols are shattered. The divine self lies broken on the common earth, breathing the thin, sharp air of truth. And here, at the absolute bottom, is the final and most important choice. The rubble of a fallen god is not a grave. It is a foundation. The only question is what he will build upon it. Will he try, with shaking hands, to gather the glittering shards and glue them back together, to resurrect a more careful, more desperate deity? Or will he do the one thing his pride, in all its towering strength, could never do? Will he choose to kneel, not in defeat, in humility? The humble path back is not a retreat. It is the most difficult advance a man can make. It is the conscious, daily act of dethroning the self. This does not mean weakness. It means a different kind of strength. It means replacing the closed, suffocating system of self-worship with an open hand. It begins with the simplest, most revolutionary act, gratitude, not as a polite sentiment, but as a fundamental reorientation of the soul. It is the deliberate remembering that you are not the source. The air in your lungs, the skills in your hands, the rare moments of peace, they are gifts. They came from somewhere, from someone, from the strange alchemy of chance and grace. The proud man kept a ledger of what he was owed. The humble man keeps a ledger of what he has been given. He looks at a meal and sees the chain of hands that brought it. He looks at a success and sees the mentors, the lucky breaks, the silent support. Gratitude punctures the illusion of self-creation. It reconnects you to the tapestry you had cut yourself out of. From gratitude flows its necessary partner, reverence. If gratitude is looking back at the gifts, reverence is looking up at the giver. It is standing once more before the vastness, not with a calculator, but with wonder. It is acknowledging that there are mysteries you will not solve, scales of justice you will not balance, beauties that exist not for your use, but for their own sake. It is hearing the silent, humming majesty of a world that does not need your permission to be. For some, this reverence is directed to a god. For others, it is for the law, for life, for the interconnected web of existence. The object matters less than the posture. The head bowed not in fear, but in awe. It is the opposite of that first fatal shift from wonder to appraisal. It is the return, and these two, gratitude and reverence, make possible the third, the act that rebuilds the bridges pride burned, service. When you are your own God, your will is for your own glory. When you have stepped down from that throne, your will can be aimed outward. Service is the will, humbled and redirected. It is the strength that once built a personal empire, now used to lift someone else up. It is the brilliant mind that once spun self-justifying narratives, now focused on solving a problem that feeds no ego. It is not grand, dramatic sacrifice for show. It is often quiet, unseen. It is listening instead of lecturing. It is asking, what do you need? Instead of declaring, this is what I will do. It is finding your strength not in how many serve you, but in how many you can authentically serve. This is the path. It is not a single moment of conversion. It is a daily, hourly discipline. The self, that would-be God, is a cunning pretender. It will try to stage a comeback. It will try to turn your gratitude into pride at being so grateful. It will try to turn your reverence into a performance of piety. It will try to turn your service into a new source of prestige, a subtler form of control. The fight is never over. You must be a watchman at the gates of your own soul. I know this path. I walk it in the dark, the cape, the cowl, the mission. It is a will, a terrible will, forged in fire. The temptation is to make it a divine mandate, to say, my pain is my authority. My vengeance is my justice. To become the very God I fight against. The only way to avoid that is to kneel. Every night before I go out into the chaos, I must remember. I remember my father's compassion, not just his loss. I feel gratitude for the ally who watches my back, for the butler who is the anchor of my sanity. I feel reverence for the law I cannot fully embody but must try to point toward, for the fragile sanctity of a life, any life. And I must define the mission not as my will imposed upon the city, but as a service to it. A broken thing trying to protect other broken things. If I forget that, even for a moment, I become not a protector, but a tyrant in the making. The mask becomes the face of the new God. The humble path is not safe. It makes you vulnerable. It opens you to pain, to disappointment, to being wrong. But the loneliness of the throne was a deeper wound. This vulnerability is a connection. It is the price of admission back into the human family. It is how you trade the echoing halls of your own palace for the warm, noisy, imperfect communion of a shared home. He stands in the rubble. Let him not rebuild a temple. Let him build a table, and let him take a seat, not at the head, but as one among many. For the man who has played God, the greatest victory is not in ruling heaven, but in finally coming home to earth.